40 seconds. That is how long it takes an adult male brown bear to kill a cub that is not his own. He does not stalk it as prey. He crosses open ground in daylight at a dead run while the mother screams and charges him from the side. He does not stop for her. He closes on the cub. There is a single crushing bite to the skull, and it is over before the mother's charge even lands. Then, in a number of documented cases, he feeds. Not always out of hunger. Sometimes simply because the body is there and no one is left strong enough to stop him. For decades, biologists filed this under predation or under generic animal savagery, the sort of violence that seems to happen in a world with no rules at all. Genetic testing on wild bear populations in Scandinavia rewrote that story completely. The cubs killed were almost never related to the male doing the killing, and the timing was never random. It clustered tightly around the opening weeks of the mating season every single year. Today, we are going to find out why a male brown bear gains something concrete in the coldest evolutionary sense from killing young he had no part in creating, and why the mother's answer to that threat is stranger and more calculated than the threat itself. Brown bears do not live like wolves or lions. There is no pack, no pride, no shared territory patrolled by a family group. A female claims a home range that can stretch across 200 square kilometers of forest and river valley, and she moves through nearly all of it alone, cubs at her side as the only stable relationship in her life. Adult males roam separate, overlapping territories that can each touch the ranges of several different females, and outside a handful of frantic weeks each late spring, the two sexes barely register each other. There is no pair bond. There is no den they return to together. A male brown bear will go his entire life without meeting most of his own offspring. And beyond the act of mating itself, he contributes nothing to raising a single one of them. That single fact is the hinge the whole system turns on. A female nursing cubs does not come back into heat. Lactation suppresses her reproductive cycle for as long as those cubs remain dependent, which in most populations runs 1.5 to 2.5 years. For a male standing in her territory during the breeding season, a nursing female is functionally invisible as a mating prospect. She will not cycle again until her current cubs are gone, whether through natural loss, through the mother finally weaning them, or through violence. That is the door sexually selected infanticide walks through. Kill the cubs that carry another male's genes, and the mother's body answers within days.
Freed from lactation, she comes into estrus, often inside the same breeding season the killing happened in, and mates again almost immediately. The male who did the killing is very often the one standing closest when she does. He has not hunted for food. He has erased a rival's bloodline from the territory and opened the exact slot he needs. Cycle 1. The mother does not hand over her cubs without a fight. Female brown bears are, size for size, among the most aggressively protective mammals on the continent, and a confrontation with an infanticidal male is not posturing. It is a real fight, with real injury on both sides, and it does not always end with the cubs as the only casualty. In the Cantabrian Mountains of northern Spain, researchers tracking documented infanticide attempts between 1996 and 2020 recorded a case where the mother refused to break off the defense, even as the male turned on her directly.
He killed her in the confrontation, then fed on her carcass for several days, and continued trying to reach her surviving cub the entire time, even with the mother already dead. Across the cub remains recovered from that same population, close to 9 in 10 showed evidence of partial consumption. This is not a side effect of hunger. It is a male absorbing serious, sometimes fatal risk to himself because on the other side of that risk sits a mating opportunity large enough to be worth it. Cycle 2. Evolution built the mother a countermeasure, and it is not the one most people expect. She does not outfight every male who might threaten her next litter, and she cannot outrun one either with cubs in tow. Instead, in the weeks before that threat exists, she mates with almost anyone who will have her. A female brown bear in estrus typically breeds with 3 to 4 different males across a single season. Researchers reconstructing paternity from hair snags and scat samples have documented individual females mating with as many as 20 separate partners inside one cycle, moving through a home range, meeting one male after another over days, each encounter brief, each one logged genetically in the cubs she eventually carries. This is not disorder. It is a named strategy: paternity confusion. Any male who has mated with her has a real, calculable chance that her next litter is partly his. Killing it stops being a clean move and becomes a bet against his own genetic line, and most males will not take that bet. One of those encounters looks nothing like combat. A male picks up a female's trail by scent, follows it for 2 days across a river valley, and finds her feeding on a hillside. There is no chase, no display, no roar. He approaches slowly. She allows it, and the two stay paired for several days, moving and resting together, mating repeatedly across that window before separating for good. Neither animal will see the other again once she is out of estrus. She may repeat the same brief pairing with a different male within the week, and again after that. Each pairing lasts only a few minutes at a time, spaced through the days the pair stays together, and by the time she moves on alone, she has banked mating history with several different males, each one now genetically invested in the possibility that her next litter is his. For years, this was an elegant theory without direct proof. Then, researchers John Swenson and Eva Bellmain, working with the Scandinavian Brown Bear Research Project, ran full paternity assignment across 2 wild study populations, using DNA collected non-invasively from hair and tissue samples over more than a decade of field monitoring. The pattern held exactly as predicted.
Males who had mated with a given female in a previous season essentially never attacked her subsequent cubs. Every confirmed infanticidal male in the dataset had no prior mating history with that specific female. The mother's promiscuity was not incidental. It was functioning, cub by cub, litter by litter, as active protection, measurable in the genetics of who lived and who did not. Cycle 3. A system built on familiarity between a female and her local males has one obvious weak point. What happens when the local males disappear? This is where the story stops being purely about wild bears and starts involving people directly. Researchers studying a heavily hunted population in Sweden between 1991 and 2011 found that removing adult males from an area through licensed hunting measurably raised infanticide risk for nearby females, but only during the mating season itself, exactly as the paternity confusion model predicted.
A new male filling a vacated territory arrives with no mating history with the resident females and no genetic stake in any cub already on the ground. Cub survival dropped further still when the male killed nearby had died more recently before the breeding season opened, meaning the vacancy was fresher and an unfamiliar replacement was actively working through it in real time. Wildlife managers in parts of Scandinavia now factor this directly into hunting quota decisions because the data is blunt about what removing males from a landscape actually does. It does not simply reduce a population count. It resets the paternity confusion, protecting every cub for kilometers around. Cycle 4. The danger does not disappear once a female successfully raises a litter to independence. It resets with her very next pregnancy, and a mother who has survived one infanticide attempt carries no immunity into the next breeding season. Field researchers have tracked individual females across successive litters and recorded repeat attempts by different unfamiliar males in consecutive years, each one running the identical calculation, each one requiring the same defense, the same fight, the same gamble on the mother's side that speed and aggression will be enough one more time. There is no version of this system where a female bear reaches permanent safety. There is only the next season, and the next unfamiliar male testing whether her cubs are worth the risk of killing them. Cycle 4.5, and the clearest version of the mechanism plays out whenever a dominant male is physically removed from a territory, whether by another male, by old age, or by a hunter's rifle. Researchers call it the immigrant male hypothesis. A new male moving into that vacated ground has never paired with any of the resident females. He carries no genetic stake in a single cub already walking that territory, and every one of them is, from his position, purely a rival's investment standing in the way of his own. Field teams have documented the same sequence repeatedly. A resident male dies or is displaced. A new male establishes himself within the same breeding season, and cubs sired by his predecessor start disappearing from that stretch of territory within weeks. The mother has no way to signal to this new arrival that she is not worth attacking. She has never mated with him. As far as his own reproductive accounting is concerned, she might as well be a stranger with cubs that belong to no one. The biology behind why any of this pays off at all traces back to a single reproductive quirk unique to bears among most large mammals: delayed implantation. A female who mates in late spring does not become visibly pregnant that month. The fertilized embryo stops developing and floats free in her uterus for months, only implanting and resuming growth in late autumn, once her body has assessed whether she has stored enough fat to survive winter denning and successfully raise a litter. Cubs are born midwinter, inside the den, blind and nearly hairless, weighing under half a kilogram, a fraction of 1% of their mother's own body weight. That vulnerability compounds the stakes on every side of this system. A litter that survives den emergence in spring still has to survive the entire following mating season before its mother can safely stop watching for unfamiliar males moving through her range. The idea that a male animal might kill unrelated young purely to accelerate his own mating opportunities did not originate with bears at all. In 1979, primatologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy proposed it while studying langur monkeys in India, where incoming dominant males taking over a troop would systematically kill nursing infants, a pattern that had disturbed and baffled field researchers for years before her paternity-based explanation reframed it as calculated reproductive strategy rather than random violence. The idea was controversial from the start. Several biologists at the time argued Hrdy was assigning deliberate intent to behavior that might just as easily reflect stress or crowding. It took until the early 1980s, when biologist Charles Stringham extended the sexually selected infanticide hypothesis specifically to bears, and then Swenson's genetic paternity work through the 1990s and 2000s, for the theory to move from a provocative idea into a documented mechanism. Confirmed not by observation alone, but by DNA evidence collected across 2 full decades of field seasons.
Cycle 5, and the myth this whole subject invites. Most people entering this topic assume a male killing young must be an aberration, a malfunction, evidence of a species behaving unnaturally under stress. Documentaries built around gentle rescue narratives reinforce that assumption at every turn. But the data out of Scandinavia, the Cantabrian Mountains, and hunted populations across 3 continents all point the same direction. This is not a glitch in an otherwise peaceful system. It is a stable, repeatable, mathematically favorable strategy for an animal whose entire reproductive interest is measured in access to fertile females, and nothing beyond that. The mother's countermeasure, promiscuity, engineered specifically to make every resident male question his own certainty about paternity, is just as calculated as the threat it defends against. Neither side is acting from cruelty or from virtue.
Both are running the only strategy that keeps their genes moving forward in a system built with no referee at all. Not every biologist accepts sexually selected infanticide as the complete explanation, even now. Researchers including Bruce McClellan and David Garcelis have argued that some documented killings may instead reflect straightforward resource competition, a male eliminating a future rival for food and territory rather than chasing an immediate mating opportunity, or, in certain cases, opportunistic predation with no strategic motive attached at all. The honest picture is that both mechanisms likely operate, sometimes inside the very same population, and separating a male's actual motive after the fact from paw prints, a carcass, and a DNA sample has real limits that field science cannot always resolve. What the genetic paternity data does settle, consistently and across independent study sites, is that infanticide correlates precisely with an absence of prior mating access. Exactly the signature sexually selected infanticide predicts, and one that resource competition alone does not fully explain. The pattern is not confined to brown bears either. Researchers have found supporting evidence for sexually selected infanticide in American black bears and in polar bears, two species that split from a common ancestor with brown bears well over 1 million years ago, living in entirely different habitats under entirely different pressures. The same behavior has also been suggested, though not yet fully confirmed genetically, in populations across British Columbia and the Pyrenees Mountains along the France-Spain border. A strategy that keeps reappearing independently across species that separated that long ago, rather than one confined to a single isolated population, is exactly what a genuine evolutionary strategy is expected to look like, as opposed to a local behavioral quirk unique to one group of bears in one valley. Female brown bears give birth to between 1 and 4 cubs at a time, typically starting around 4 to 5 years of age and continuing until roughly 28 or 29 years old. And across that entire reproductive lifespan, sexually selected infanticide remains one of the leading documented causes of cub mortality in every population studied closely enough to trace individual deaths back to a cause. Around 80% of all bear-on-bear killing recorded across long-term Scandinavian monitoring was carried out by adult males, a figure that lines up with the mating access explanation far better than any theory built on random aggression alone. Multiplied across a population over generations, this single behavior shapes how many cubs reach adulthood, how mothers choose where to den and how far to range, and ultimately, how many bears a given landscape can sustain year over year. The Scandinavian Brown Bear Research Project is still running today, decades after Swenson first proposed testing the hypothesis genetically, and GPS collars now let field teams watch this exact sequence unfold almost in real time. A collared female's location data can show researchers, within hours, when she has stopped moving in the tight, cub-paced radius of a mother with dependents, and started covering ground the way a female in estrus does, alone and fast, well before anyone confirms in person that her cubs are gone. That shift in movement pattern has become its own kind of evidence, a signature written in GPS coordinates rather than in a body on the ground. And it has let researchers document infanticide events that no one ever directly witnessed. Right now, in the forests of Scandinavia, the Cantabrian Mountains of Spain, and grizzly country across western North America, this exact calculation is running in real time in every territory where a breeding age male and a nursing female share ground during a handful of weeks each spring. A cub born this winter, in a den somewhere in that range, will spend the next 2.5 years as someone else's unclaimed opportunity, protected only by the mating history its mother built before it was ever born. There is no cruelty running through this system, and there is no mercy either. There is only a genetic accounting, playing itself out generation after generation, entirely indifferent to which side of it a human observer would rather root for.